For centuries, ancient Indian Buddhism was far more than a philosophy. It was an institutional powerhouse dominating the subcontinent's political and economic life. That power reached its zenith during the Gupta Empire in the 5th century. This was the era of the Mahavihara, massive, walled monastic universities like Nalanda that turned the pursuit of enlightenment into a physical fortress. These walled campuses operated as sophisticated economic engines. They were sustained by immense royal land grants and global trade networks, allowing thousands of monks to live as full-time scholars. But the modern map tells a different story. Despite originating in India, the Buddhist population in its homeland has collapsed to a microscopic fraction of a percent today. To understand how a religion vanishes from its birthplace, we have to look at the specific architecture of its success. The massive walls built to protect and elevate the Buddhist monks created an unintended isolation. Over centuries, these defenses quietly disconnected the faith from the very people who sustained it. Inside those walls, the Buddhist Sangha shifted its focus. Monks became highly specialized, esoteric scholars. In many ways, they functioned as distant landlords, presiding over the rural laypeople who worked their vast monastic properties. Outside the walls, a different movement was sweeping the rural masses. Devotional Hindu sects, part of the Bhakti movement, offered accessible, emotional rituals that appealed directly to the daily lives of everyday villagers. This new Hindu synthesis competed by strategically absorbing popular Buddhist ideas. They went as far as adopting the Buddha himself, declaring him an avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu to bring his followers into the fold. While rival Jain and Hindu leaders wrote dozens of practical guides for the lives of common people, Buddhist literature almost entirely ignored anyone who wasn't a monk. By retreating into isolated centers of scholarship, the Buddhist institution lost its grassroots foundation. The Indian population was being absorbed into Hinduism right at the base of the monastery walls. Then came the political shock. In the 5th and 6th centuries, White Hun invasions shattered the centralized Gupta Empire into dozens of regional kingdoms. The rulers of these new, smaller territories faced constant threats. To survive, they needed pragmatic, actionable advice on warfare, law, and statecraft. Buddhist monks, sworn to monastic renunciation, could not offer the military or administrative counsel these kings required. Hindu Brahmins, however, provided a staff of administrators armed with practical texts on how to run a state. The financial consequences followed quickly. These new kings shifted their vital royal patronage, tax exemptions, and land grants away from Buddhism and handed them to the Brahmins. Because the monasteries failed to adapt to the political needs of these new rulers, they were systematically starved of the economic support required to keep their massive campuses running. The final blow arrived in the 12th century, as brutal Turkic armies aggressively swept through the Gangetic Plains. Buddhism's extreme centralization, hoarding scholars, texts, and wealth into a few massive universities, made them highly visible targets. Invading armies mistook the walled campuses of Nalanda and Vikramshila for military forts. They burned libraries and massacred monks, leaving the faith's infrastructure in ruins. By concentrating everything in these massive centers, the tradition had nowhere to hide. Once the physical campuses burned, the religion's intellectual and structural heart was erased in a single night. Hinduism survived the exact same invasions. Decentralized and embedded in village life, it endured, while massive Buddhist sites were left as abandoned ruins. The surviving monks were forced to flee India entirely, carrying their traditions over the mountains to find refuge in the Himalayas, Tibet, and Southeast Asia. Buddhism only exists in its Indian homeland today due to modern revivals, driven by the arrival of Tibetan refugees and social movements for the marginalized in the 20th century. Indian Buddhism did not die from a single event. It fell because its institutions prioritized their own insular academic and economic power over a connection to the people. Its decline proves that when an institution builds walls to isolate itself from the masses, it accidentally cuts itself off from the only foundation that can keep it alive: